looking very briefly at the brain and how damage to the brain can affect how a person experiences their world. We'll also be looking at how person-centered thinking do submit any questions that you have as we go along by typing them into the question box, and if I can, I'll answer them as we go. The webinar will be recorded and this will be made available. I'm also going to create a useful reference list. I'm going to be talking about some resources as we go through, and I'm going to post this on Facebook, Twitter and email. I'm also going to add on to that list, as well as the stuff I'm going to talk about, is all the really, really powerful and useful books published by Helen Sanderson around supporting people living with dementia and personalisation. And my PowerPoint is going to work. There we go. So, what is dementia? It may sound like a really silly question, but it's a necessary one. People often ask me, is there a difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? Well, the words dementia and Alzheimer's disease can at times appear interchangeable. Dementia is a collection of symptoms caused by changes to the brain. Those changes can appear through injury or disease. Whilst it's widely known that many people living with dementia experience changes to their memory abilities, memory is not the only thing that's affected by dementia. People can also experience, amongst other things, difficulties with their language, with coordination, and with problem solving. All of these together impact on the person's ability to complete really ordinary everyday tasks as fluently as they did before they experienced those changes. So let's get back to our question. Is there a difference between dementia and Alzheimer's disease? Well, yes, there is. Alzheimer's disease is the commonest cause of dementia. Everybody living with Alzheimer's disease has dementia. Not everybody with dementia has Alzheimer's disease. There are hundreds of different causes. In this section, we simply do not have enough time to explore any of them in any level of depth. But there are some really, really useful downloads available from the Alzheimer's Society. And I can also recommend a fantastic series of articles by a colleague of mine, Elizabeth Milne, from the Journal of Dementia Care. I'm going to share these links and further suggestion reading on email, Facebook and Twitter after this session. So, how common is dementia? Dementia currently affects about 820,000 people living in the UK. That's about 1.3% of our population. Wembley Stadium holds 90,000 people. You would need 9 Wembley Stadiums, slightly over actually, to hold the people living with dementia in the UK today. Using the same idea about football stadiums, you'd need about a quarter of a stadium to fit about 18,500 people. But that's the number of people living with dementia today who are under the age of 65. With over 800,000 people living with dementia in the UK, the chances are that alongside our paid or voluntary role, we all know someone personally who either lives with dementia or someone who supports someone who does. Since the 2009 National Dementia Strategy's commitment to ensure a trained and effective workforce, the Department of Health has recently published figures showing that over 300,000 healthcare staff and over 100,000 social care staff have now received foundation-level dementia training, which is really good. Following on from the Prime Minister's challenge, we've also seen a huge commitment, not just in this country, but worldwide, to making dementia-friendly communities. But dementia is not just confined to the UK. Dementia affects people across the globe. In 2013, David Cameron hosted the first ever G8 Dementia Summit in London. It was designed to be a catalyst to engage and inspire people from across the world to start to work together. The goal was to create global efforts to reduce stigma, exclusion and fear. So, the last slide told us there are 7.9 million more people living with dementia across the world every single year. That means that every 4 seconds, one more person begins their experience with dementia. This webinar, if you stay with me for questions and answers, is about 60 minutes long. That's 3,600 seconds. That means that over the time of this webinar, 900 more people across the world are going to be affected by dementia. And globally, those numbers are projected to increase. Global issues need global strategies. People living with dementia globally face issues that act as barriers to their being treated as full and equal partners. But experience tells us that barriers are only barriers if you let them be. Let's take age, for example, often seen as a barrier to living life to the full. But we said a barrier is only a barrier if you let it. Let's take, for example, American-born Twyla Boston. She's the lady in the top left-hand picture. She was 98 years of age when she gained her first degree. And what about 103-year-old Froja Singh? He was awarded the British Empire Medal recently, and he's the oldest marathon runner in the world, and he is still going on. Puts me to shame. Ruth Flowers is the bottom left-hand picture. She became a DJ at the age of 68. She's now 72. She performs in clubs across the world, and she's got no plans to retire. And last, and I mean by no means least, is Joanna Quast. She's 87 years of age, and she's the world's oldest gymnast. For a person living with dementia, the barrier isn't age, it's the dementia. In person-centered thinking, we acknowledge that it isn't the dementia that's the barrier, but the attitude of people around the person that can prevent us seeing that person, can block our appreciation of their skills and their gifts, and can make us blind to their ambitions and their dreams. Any barrier can prevent us from knowing the person and seeing and acting upon what's important to them. Following a huge raft of local, national and now global initiatives, the majority of dementia care services today are becoming really good at focusing on best support for the person, and I'm really pleased. That's excellent. We do need to know and act upon what's important for services to do to keep people healthy and as well as possible, and we'll be exploring that as we go through the session. But alongside that, we also need to strike a balance by drawing equally on what's important to the person. We're always looking for balance, and person-centered thinking tools help us to restore that balance to the person's experience, to make the person visible by drawing out and acting upon what's important to them alongside how best to support them. To be able to personalise services and support to meet the wants and needs of a person, we need to know as much as we can about the person's experience of dementia. To begin to do this, we need to understand all the factors that can really influence that experience. This is the enriched model of dementia care. This model offers a way of understanding dementia that helps us to see the whole person. It is a bio-psycho-social model. This highlights the fact that there's something happening to the brain, that's the bio bit, but the person's still influenced by psychological factors, that's the psycho bit, such as their personality and their life story. And the way that people are treating them, that's the social bit. This model of understanding was created by Tom Kitwood and developed further by Brooker, May and Edwards at their time at Bradford Dementia Group. I use this model in my working practice and personalisation every single day. It may be helpful to think about D as the experience of dementia, that it's a combination of the NI, which is neurological impairment, the H, which is health, B, which is biography or people's life story, P, which is all about our personality, and SP, which is social psychology. Now that's about the impact of the physical and social environment around the person. I like to think about the model as being a seesaw, with the fulcrum, the balancing point, below the equal sign. I love the thing about seesaws. The thing about seesaws is that any change on one side of the seesaw will affect the other side. And if a side has changed, it's gone up or it's gone down, it has to be because the other side has moved in the opposite direction. So, anything that changes on one side of the seesaw, for example the D, the experience of dementia, it has to be because something has changed on the other side. What staff will tell you is the person's dementia's got worse. Yeah. Changes can happen along any point on the right-hand side of the seesaw. Any changes will affect the person's experience, and that will affect how persons see them. Like me, I'm sure you hear in your working day staff reporting the person's actions have become perhaps challenging. They may report increasing confusion, disturbed sleep, distressed behaviours, declining support, all alongside those statements that the person's dementia's got worse. What staff are seeing is the person's actions, their experience changing. So the D side of the seesaw has gone up. I've described this, I couldn't draw a seesaw moving, so I've described this as red on the image. So often these changes are assumed to result from the dementia getting worse. Because dementia can't be cured, it's assumed that there's no point in intervening. So because nothing can be done, people assume that nothing can be done. Nothing is done. The change is accepted by staff as the new normal for this person. The seesaw model gives us another way of thinking about this. In the visualization of the model, if the D has gone up, then something on the other side of the seesaw has to have changed. One of the commonest changes, the one I always look for when I'm asked to go and support staff, is changes to the person's health, shown here as the H. A person's physical well-being can and very often does change really quickly. Let's say, for example, that a person's developing a urinary tract infection, a very common and, you know what, commonly unrecognised condition. That will cause their H to go down. But what the staff see and report is the dementia getting worse. On our seesaw, that's the D going up. If we want to bring the D down, what we have to do is push the H back up. For me, it really works by looking at it in this visual way. By treating the infection, we can correct the changes in the H, and that, thinking visually again, pushes the other side of the seesaw back down. What staff report is the dementia apparently getting better. What they may mean is that those actions that they originally reported as challenging, the confusion, the disturbed sleep, the stress behaviour, has reduced or gone away. What we're actually doing is correcting the infection, which in turn improves the experience for this person. By accepting that there is something we can do, always something we can try and do, by treating the physical changes or altering what we do, we can try and bring the person's experience back into balance. We call this relative well-being, providing best support for the person. Now, to do this, we also need to know what's important to the person. We draw that from their knowledge of their personality, their life story, their hopes and their dreams. We're going to explore each of these elements across the seesaw in detail. But throughout, it's important to remember we can't see any element in isolation. I'm going to talk about them separately, but that's just for the purposes of this. We have to see everything together. To maintain balance, we need to look at the whole person. So, let's start by looking at a quick look at each element. The first is neurological impairment, or damage to the brain and its functions. We've got a couple of images of the brain here. The human brain is characterized by having a particularly wrinkly appearance. The wrinkly thing is the cerebral cortex, often just called the cortex. Our cortex supports key functions like language and memory, which are very complex and require a lot of processing power. The cortex is a massive sheet of nerve cells. If you're to pull it off and perhaps iron it out, it would be quite thin, only a few millimeters thick, but it would have a surface area of about 1 meter. The cortex is also very vulnerable to dementia, and the core symptoms we have looked at result primarily from disruption to cortical thinking. Underneath the cortex are many other structures that also have important jobs and work with the cortex in giving us all our amazing thinking abilities. Often in dementia, the structures underneath the cortex are less damaged. The cerebral cortex is divided into 4 sections called lobes. We're going to look briefly at the function of the lobes to give us a better understanding of how this person may be experiencing and responding to the world around us. This in turn helps us know what to do to offer best support. The first area we're going to explore is the occipital lobe, responsible for our being able to see the world around us. Damage to this area can impact on the person's independence and well-being. Solutions can often be found, but first we have to recognise what the person might be experiencing and why. Some people may have a difficulty in distinguishing between colours and shades or colours. This may make it difficult to see the difference between foreground and background. That's the reason why researchers have suggested that things like toilet seats and grab rails in bathrooms, for example, are different colours to the toilets and walls. The colour and pattern of things, such as flooring, can also make a difference. Imagine you see a blue sparkly thing beneath your feet on the floor, and you can hear water running. Sparkly blue and water. What does that make you think of? Well, it makes me think there might be water on the floor. That may be why some people are reluctant to walk on some surfaces. Telling a person there's no water on the floor really isn't going to work, because their brain is telling them that the water is there. Anybody refusing to walk through that is actually, I think, acting quite reasonably. Would you be happy to walk through water in your slippers? Because I wouldn't. Let's have a look at this lounge. They were brand new, the staff bought brand new chairs, but they were complaining to me that nobody was sitting in them. For people with occipital damage, the chairs may appear as a block of colour, with no definition of where you sit. The seat the same colour as the back, the same colour as the arms. If you just saw a block, how would you know what you were to do with it and which bit to sit on? The solution's really quick, doesn't cost a penny. I simply move the seat cushions. The centre of the chairs instantly become visible, and the purpose of the object becomes a little bit clearer. People started to use the chairs. We can apply the same thinking to all sorts of objects, such as food, for example. The same thing may happen. Think about white fish on a white plate, or white potato on a white plate, or brown tea inside a brown mug. The foreground, the food, may blend with the background, the plate or the cup. The result is that the person, the food or the drink, has just disappeared. How many people do we hear say that there's nothing to drink in front of them, when the drink is there, but it may only be obvious to us because we don't have occipital damage? Changing the colour of the plate or the glass can help. You may have to experiment to get it right, but doing nothing isn't the option. Here's Dot. Let's meet Dot. Sorry, my slide with Dot didn't work very well. Let me tell you about Dot. Everyone that knows Dot describes her as a generous, kind, loving and caring person. Her sister Betty says that she's her best friend and such a good listener. Betty says that she and Dot laugh and cuddle now like silly little schoolgirls, because that's just the sort of person she is. When I met Dot, Betty and Dot's daughters create her one-page profile. Dot said that she wanted Betty to be part of the photograph on her one-page profile, and she couldn't be who she was without her other half. As we're going through different areas of the brain, we're going to see how changes to Dot's brain affects how she copes with her day and how she navigates through her life. And we can see how we can translate our knowledge to deliver best support for her. One-page profiles are a person-centered thinking tool that support the transition for people living with dementia from being passive recipients of care to they're being recognised as full members of our society. One-page profiles and person-centered thinking tools herald a new progression beyond personhood towards citizenship and personalisation, as services aspire to rebalance the amount of choice and control that people have of their services. When we met to create Dot's one-page profile, staff reported that Dot appeared startled at times when they came towards her when they spoke to her. This startled, when she was startled, she became distressed, and that distress could last for a whole day. With careful questioning and with observation, we're able to see that Dot had a real difficulty seeing objects and people on her left-hand side. This extract from Dot's one-page profile reflects the best support for her to overcome the effect of that damage to her occipital lobe. The next area we're going to look at is the parietal lobe. Some people with damage to this area may have a difficulty with coordinating their movements, including being able to navigate their way through their environment. I'm a dementia care mapper and a dementia care mapping trainer, and I use dementia care mapping as a way of observing and understanding a person's experience. When I'm mapping, I always look at how the person eats. Do they use a knife and a fork? Do they use just one hand? Do they use their fingers? How a person eats gives me clues as to what level of activity of daily living the person can comfortably engage in. It takes a huge amount of coordination to use a knife and a fork. Think about it the next time you have your tea. It takes as much to knit or to do up buttons. The person uses their fingers to eat. They may find it difficult to use tools, as they may be more comfortable engaging in activities that don't require additional tools. For example, mixing bread with their hands, hand painting, that sort of thing. A person who's opening their mouth to accept food is living at a sensory level, and all engagement and occupation must be at this level. This is a really simplified explanation of a fabulous activity planning tool that I use from Jackie Paul. It's going to be referenced in the reading list. Remember, these are really broad suggestions only, and a person's abilities can change day to day and within the day. Our role is to be ready to adapt and change and along with them. Again, this extract from Dot's one-page profiles shows how we translate our knowledge into her best support. Dot has some difficulty with coordinating both a knife and a fork. but she can eat independently if supported correctly and sensitively to do so. She would be mortified if her food was cut up at the table in front of other people. The next section we're going to look at is the temporal lobe. Damage in this area can cause difficulties in recalling memories, as well as language difficulties such as word finding, understanding what others are saying, and interpreting what you hear. People may also have a difficulty in recognizing and naming objects and people. For some people, they may have a difficulty in understanding concept or abstract ideas. For example, they may not understand the offer, "Would you like to go to the art class?" They may say no. This may be too abstract and not a concept for them. They may do better if we bring them paintbrushes, paints and material before start talking about going and painting. A person may be able to complete parts of actions by drawing upon very deep memories of actions and learned procedures. So it may help them if we break down instructions into very small, manageable chunks. It's also really important to use language and gestures that are familiar to the person. Dot has been brought up with impeccable manners. She will do anything rather than appear rude. That means that she will always smile, nod and say yes to any question you ask her, even if she hasn't heard you correctly. She says that she'd rather miss out on a treat than people think that she was rude. There's a structure in the left temporal lobe called the hippocampus. It can be troublesome at times. This is responsible for sorting and storing memories. Have you ever tried to remember a particular line from a song or a poem? It can be almost impossible, but if you sing the whole song through or repeat the whole of the poem, the line comes back to you. That's because your brain, thanks in part to the hippocampus, stored the whole song as a block, not individual lines. One of the structure's roles is to connect our memories with sensory information. That's why we may become suddenly sad when we hear a song connected with a sad memory, or suddenly feel really safe and loved when smelling fresh bread cooking, as that might remind us of Sunday mornings snuggled up in Granny's kitchen watching her cook. Let's think of an example. Let's think of Ethel. She's 102 years old. She used to go to the seaside on family holidays when she was little. Now let's think about how your senses are utterly bombarded at seaside. We have 5 senses: sight, sound, touch, taste, smell. When we're working with people living with dementia, we have to do everything we can to make the most of every sensory contact. Let's go back to the beach. Let's think about how our senses are engaged on the beach. We might see donkeys, the shape of the waves and the rocks. We might taste ice cream or fish and chips. We might, or candy floss, my favourite. We might smell the salt in the air, or we might smell the vinegar from the fish and chips. We might hear seagulls, children laughing, or the Punch and Judy. And we might feel the sand between our toes. There is nothing like it. So every time Ethel went to the seaside, her brain connected the memories with the senses she was experiencing. Now in her care setting, Ethel meets Joey from the Donkey Sanctuary. Thinking about the connections between memory and sensation, do you think it'd be out of place for her to expect fish and chips for tea, or to ask for an ice cream? I don't think so. The last lobe we're going to look at is the frontal lobe. This area is responsible for our judgment and regulating our behaviour and our emotions. Damage to this area can make people appear to have a lack of care or concern for others. They may appear rash or impulsive. It's also responsible for our planning actions and learning new activities. Some people may have a difficulty with organising and learning new tasks, doing things in the right order we call sequencing. They may appear repetitive. Some people may have a short or restricted attention span. That person needs us to help them by removing the distractions around them. Some people may have a difficulty with planning activities and actions. People may not be able to forward plan activities or imagine what activity might entail, or even if they're going to enjoy it. It's important not to leave the person to make plans without support. Offering a huge range of choices and options isn't always helpful. What would you like to do today is not a useful question. As to answer the question, the person must first know what's on offer, hold on to those ideas as they weigh up their thoughts, needs and wishes, and they'll be able to articulate the answer. All of that requires a high level of cognition, not least an ability to conceptualize all of the activities. It would be far more helpful to offer a few, or maybe even one, activity based on your knowledge of the person's strengths and abilities, life histories and personality. This is not about denying choice, it's offering a real choice to ensure the person has agency over what happens around them. You may have heard of the adrenaline rush and the fight or flight system. The structure that mediates this powerful threat response lies below the cerebral cortex and therefore is often left unharmed in a person living with dementia. Thus, they still retain the capacity for fight and flight responses when they perceive the environment to be threatening. Such an important influence over the person's behaviour means that careful attention is required to be paid to ensure the environment is supportive and not disruptive. You're less likely to have heard that the fight or flight system has an opposite partner called the rest and digest system. When there's no threat to the environment, this system takes over, putting us in a state of rest and relaxation, allowing some pleasant downtime. This system is also usually intact for people living with dementia, meaning if they perceive their environment to be safe, they too can rest and relax and enjoy that downtime. It is really important to note, however, that it's not our carer's perception of whether the environment's safe or not. It's about what the person perceives. Think around your own care setting. Think about the bells ringing, the telephones ringing, staff shouting to each other. Restful or relaxing? Betty laughs at that although Dot can be stubborn, it's only because she's honest to the absolute core and will never let others think or do anything that might be wrong in her eyes. Dot's always lived by her very own, very strict moral values, believing that everyone should be kind, even if it means you have to go out of your way. Despite this, she's also been quite nervous and anxious about asking for help for herself. Okay, we've now looked at neurological impairment. So let's carry on by looking at the other elements on our seesaw. Dot's coming with us. The next element of the enriched model is H, for health and well-being. Physical ill-being such as delirium, depression, are often misdiagnosed with people living with dementia. Common causes can be systemic infections, constipation, dehydration, malnutrition, effects of medication, changes to sleep patterns, and pain. Pain is so often overlooked for people living with dementia, and it's recognised as a cause of behaviours that staff find challenging. I am always really concerned about people living with dementia not receiving adequate pain relief. When, for example, is pain relief given in the morning? Is it given before somebody gets up, washed and dressed, or afterwards? If it's given afterwards, you may hear staff reporting that the person's resisted to care, don't like getting washed and dressed. They may simply be in pain. How much better for the person if they were given the pain relief before the personal care? We need to learn to listen with our eyes. Because of the damage to the brain, the person may not be able to interpret the signals they're receiving about the pain the way that somebody without that damage might. They're still in pain, but they may not be able to articulate it to themselves or to you. So we need to look for the signs of distress, restless behaviour, sweating, raised pulse, that sort of thing. Dot's health's usually good. She doesn't tend to suffer from pain, but her reluctance to complain about pain is a bit of a concern for us, because should she be in pain, we're not entirely confident she'd feel confident enough to tell us. But what we do know is that food, good food and a healthy diet is really important to Dot. Dot's daughter said that she'd never had much money when she was growing up, but her mum would offer to make a meal for anybody else she thought was in need. She said she'd often come home from school to find complete and utter strangers sat at the table tucking in. In that climate, Dot was always friendly and welcoming, but checked and accounted for every single scrap of food she had to. Dot's also a strict vegetarian. She's also been very particular about the food on her plate. As we've already seen, the damage in Dot's brain means she doesn't always hear what people say to her, so she may not be able to hear or understand a menu that's given verbally. She doesn't see what's on the left-hand side of her field of vision, so she may not see the food that's placed on the left-hand side of her plate. Because of the damage to her temporal lobe, she may not recognise any substance as meat. We also know that she hates confrontation, and she feels that manners are everything. Knowing this, what we know about Dot, we may know that she may not complain if meat is placed on her plate. Knowing her values, we also know that she may feel compelled to eat the meat if you place it there. Our role in supporting Dot is to uphold her beliefs and values. Many of us have got foibles about food. People that know me know that I have many. But I've got a question for you. Think about your favourite food. It might be your favourite dish or your favourite snack. Think about the way it's cooked, the way it's prepared, the way it's presented, where you like to eat it. Now think about your care setting. Are you confident that you could eat the food that you want, the way that you want it, in your care setting? If you can, fabulous, superb. If you can't, I want you to reflect on the implications of that. Because the chances are that if you couldn't receive the food that you want, the way that you want it, people living in that care setting with dementia might not be receiving the food that they want now. The next section is personality. People have many common traits, and these range on spectrums between nervous and confident, outgoing and shy, curious and cautious, friendly to competitive, and organised to easygoing. When considering personality, we need to consider a person's underlying traits, especially when we're devising plans or planning activities for them. For a person who's organised, they may want to be involved, or at least feel involved, in the planning of an activity. A more easygoing person may be quite happy to sit back and let somebody else do that for them. A shy person may not necessarily feel comfortable in large group activities, but an outgoing one's going to want to take over the limelight. It's really important to recognise the traits that a person has and use that knowledge in building best support for them. Dot describes herself as very easygoing. Her daughter and her sister say that she can be a little bit too easygoing at times and that she'll never speak up for herself, even if she's worried. Dot says that she finds it hard to follow very fast conversations. She does laugh about this, making light, but will say afterwards to her family that she feels very anxious when people talk too fast. Her worry is that it might be rude to stop them talking, even if she doesn't understand. So she would prefer to smile and nod as they're talking, to show that she's being kind and polite. But afterwards she worries that they've asked her for help and she hasn't been able to give it. The next element in our seesaw is life story, biography. I hear and see many fabulous pieces of life story work. I always think about life story as collecting precious items, such as your favourite sweets into a jar. Holding a person's precious memories is safeguarding, keeping it. It's a privilege. It's one of the privileges working in health and social care. We must gather and hold those stories safe, ready to give back to the person for fun, as part of sharing, but also when the person needs support to hold on to their intrinsic humanity and uniqueness. Life story work is all about future as well as past. During the one-page profile meetings, we always explore a person's hopes and dreams. It's important that we can support that person to collect new sweets as well as maintain their old ones. But with privilege comes responsibility. If you are going to ask questions and delve into the life story of people we support, we must be prepared to share our own. I carry photographs of me as a child, photographs of my girls, my dog and my horses. I feel I cannot ask to look through somebody's private photographs if I'm not prepared to share mine in return. Here's Dot again. Dot loved and adored her husband George. They had private names for each other. Her family tell me that they never knew his name for her, but she always called him Dusty. During the one-page profile meeting, we asked what was working and not working for Dot, her family and staff. What wasn't working for Dot's family was that not all staff knew about Dot's pet name for George. Nor did they know how the damage in her brain caused her sometimes to mix up the name of her husband with that of her father. Dot's daughter and her sister both said that when Dot becomes distressed, she will often call her father Dusty. When she does, she'll become further distressed if people try to correct her, or to try to talk to her about her husband, Dusty. When we spoke to Dot, Dot said that what works for her is just having a hug and a cuddle. That always makes her feel safe. The final section in the enriched model is social psychology. In this we recognise the influence that social and psychological environments around the person has on their well-being. Let's consider living space. Do we bring people together into communal spaces because what's in the space and the activities there meet what's important to the person? Or do we bring them into communal spaces because we've spent a lot of money building a communal space? What about bedrooms or other personal spaces? I'm speaking to you from my dining room. I'm surrounded by shelves of books. I'm a bookaholic. I've got photographs of my children, my horses and my dog. There are paintings on the wall from my eldest daughter, she's an artist. And my youngest daughter displays her pony club trophies. On one shelf, a whole shelf of my bookshelf is travel books and maps. You can guess an awful lot about me from what's in this room. As carers, we should be able to stand at a person's private space and know all about them. Here's the challenge. Think about one of the most vulnerable people that you support. Go to them with their permission, go to their bedroom door, look in their bedroom. Can you tell who the person is, what's important to them from the view? If you can, that's fabulous. If you can't, reflect on the impact of that on that person and think about how we can make change. What about recreating familiar spaces? There are some really good products out there, and I've seen some really fabulous spaces created inside dementia care settings. But I've also seen some 1- or 2-dimensional reproductions. Reproduction pubs, for example, with dartboards painted on the wall, and no alcohol. Can you recall the last time you were in a pub that didn't serve alcohol? How long would you stay? Having fabulous spaces inside the care setting is great, but as we develop our practice through personalisation, we also have to begin to realise that we must do all we can to enable connection with the spaces outside of the care setting. It's one thing to create a bar experience inside a care setting. It's something completely different to go to the pub for a beer after work. Dot prefers to be in her own bedroom. She has her television there, with peace and quiet when Betty visits. They love to sit together to do their crosswords. Because of the damage in Dot's brain, she does lose her concentration. So sometimes what she needs is a little bit of support to remember what to do next. When she's playing Scrabble or Bingo, she needs support to move on to the next task. We've been able to include that in the best support on her one-page profile. That's the end of the presentation for this webinar. I hope it's been of interest to you. Before we go, I have another question for you, or another challenge really. What I want you to do is to think about one thing that you may do as a result of listening to the webinar, and perhaps post those thoughts on Facebook or tweet me on Twitter. I'd really love to hear from you. Okay, what we do now is if there are any questions, we can go to question time. I can't see any questions here, which is great. So what I will say is that I hope, as I say, I hope it's been useful to you. The next webinar we're going to present is on the 24th of February. And in that, we're going to be understanding and thinking about supporting the person living with dementia to hold on to who they are. A great deal more about holding on to the intrinsic uniqueness of the person. We'll also be looking at the teamwork that needs to be supported around that person. Thinking about what we learn about ourselves and how we translate that into the work that we do. And exploring matching to support identity, autonomy and personhood. Again, thank you again for listening. And please do make contact with me on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you.